Look, we'll get into today's session, and we're delighted to have a really brilliant expert that we've come across in this area of selling without selling. We wanted to devote our first session of 2024 to that whole subject of getting more business from either new or existing clients, because we know, as we say, everybody's number goes back to zero at the start of a year. And it's always a daunting task facing into a new year of regenerating revenue. So I'm delighted to welcome along, say, somebody that we've been really impressed with since we came across him at the Freelance Business Month last October. He joins us at stupid o'clock, I'm told, all the way from Austin in Texas. And his name is Reuben Swartz. Reuben, you're very welcome. And thanks again for taking the time today. Uh, Let me tell the audience a little bit about you if you want to say it yourself, but just let me give you a quick background on Reuben. He's the founder of a company called Mimiran. Hopefully, I'm getting pronunciation, Reuben, right. And he describes it as an anti-CRM, customer relationship management, that is, for independent consultants or freelancers who love serving clients but hate selling. It helps companies sell faster or individuals sell faster and more profitably. He'll talk about this a bit more. He also is the host and chief nerd, as he describes himself, of a podcast called Sales for Nerds. He went from being a computer science and software engineering graduate and expert to sales and marketing consulting for some of the Fortune 500 companies. And his mission, he says, is to help freelancers or consultants make a bigger dent in the universe by getting more clients, using their talents to teach instead of market, to connect instead of network, and to help instead of sell. Reuben, you're very welcome.
Peter, Una, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. One of the mantras that I've learned being someone who's worked for myself for a long time and has a bit of an independent streak is just because we're solo, it doesn't mean we have to be alone. So kudos to you for building this wonderful community. And I don't want to detain anybody or keep anybody longer, but if people do have questions, I'm happy to hang around for a little bit after our allotted time. So
Reuben.
real quickly about me, Peter already got into it, but I was literally a Birkenstock wearing software developer. My first client trip, I managed to throw my rental car keys into a dumpster along with a bunch of fast food wrappers. And I thought I should never be around clients. That's clearly not for me. And then over time, I realized that that's actually where all the interesting stuff is happening. So I went and bought a suit because I actually had to go to Europe and I was expected to wear a suit and tie there. And then I had twins and I decided I didn't want to be traveling and on the road all the time. And I'd love to say that I had this great insight about building an anti-CRM for independent consultants. And I set out to do that, but that's not what happened at all. That's another long story that we won't get into now. But the irony for me was here I was telling some of the most successful companies in the world how to do better at sales and marketing, but I was not doing well at my own sales and marketing because I had absorbed a lot of the myths that you get when you're working with these large organizations. Like you have to be some kind of sales rock star, you have to be some kind of marketing genius, you have to be some kind of master networker. And I was none of those things. And trying to impersonate those people went very badly. And so I would go through what I think of as the cycle of doom, right? Like, oh, here's some shiny new sales and marketing tactic. You get really excited for a little bit. Then you get frustrated because it doesn't work. And you say, it's all word of mouth anyway. And then you go, gosh, this is so annoying. There's got to be a better way. Let me find some new shiny sales and marketing tactic. And I would go around this loop. I don't know if any of you have participated in this, but it gets kind of frustrating. So what I learned eventually was not to put anyone down. Professional salespeople, professional marketers, they have challenging jobs and it's a lifelong learning experience. I'm not trying to say that it's not a real job, but when you're an expert in what you do, you already know what you need to be effective at sales and marketing. You just need to channel it more effectively. And I like to think about, well, what's the easiest sale you've ever had? And for most of us, it is that favorite client that calls you up again and says, hey, we want to do another project like that one we did last year. Or it's that perfect referral from that favorite client. Hey, I heard what you did for Acme. We would like to do something similar. What would that look like? Doesn't even feel like selling, right? On the other hand, if you are feeling like you're meeting lots of people, but no one wants to buy, and gosh, I'm just no good at selling, everyone's objecting to the price, then it feels like you're struggling, like it's hard work. And what I realized was I was in a relationship business, right? We are all in a relationship business. And the corollary to that is that we are in a conversation business. And I was doing a lot of things to try to get out of conversations. So let's think a little bit about kind of the universe of people, and we'll be this red dot because we're at the center of our own universe. And we're trying to get the message out to our potential prospects. Hey, look, I do all this wonderful stuff, but everyone is busy blaring their message out, right? With modern electronic email, social networking, AI, blah, 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 like just more and more noise. And so we tend to just shout louder, which doesn't really work all that effectively. And it's one thing if you're Coca-Cola or something like that, and you're spending billions of dollars in marketing. Most of us are not in that position. So we need to do something a little bit different, especially because we're trying to reach people who may not be right next to us, right? The natural instinct is to try to accommodate our message to what the people around us want to hear. But in reality, maybe some of the people that need to hear this are not right next to us. And what we can do is if we've got partners, people who are next to us, who do know, like, and trust us, if we can get them to amplify and repeat our message, it's much more likely to reach our intended audience. But we have to empower them to do that. And a lot of times we are not doing a good job of empowering what I like to think of as our virtual sales team. And especially like most of us on this call, I'm guessing, are here because we all hate selling. And we've got all these people who are out there who are happy to do some of the selling for us if we let them. And it's on us to do that. And then we do a good job with that. That message spreads further. And in fact, it kind of clears out some of the people who don't belong. And it makes it easier for our tribe to start congregating together closer to us, and everything gets exponentially easier. And the way we do this is by having really strong positioning. So, apologize for the math. I am a host of Sales for Nerds. This is just some representative numbers. You can play with this, for your own, whatever you feel comfortable with. But basically, what I want to emphasize here is how much positioning makes a difference. And so I'm just going to say weak and strong. We'll get into more details in a second. And I'm going to make the supposition that we get the same number of referrals in each case. This is not true. A lot of people say, well, if I have much tighter positioning, I'm going to get fewer referrals. And in fact, the opposite will happen. But, right, when Una's going through her mental Rolodex, if you're really tight, you're going to pop up. If you're really amorphous and vague, you're not going to pop up. So anyway, let's assume for the sake of argument, you get the same number of referrals. Let's assume that even with weak positioning, 80% of people are going to take a meeting just because they want to be polite, but probably more are going to take a meeting if you have really strong positioning, right? So we have slightly more initial conversations. Well, how many of those turn into proposals? I think I'm being very generous here in saying with weak positioning, half of them are going to turn into proposals. Probably not that many, right? And then how many conversations do we have to have after the proposal? This is where things kind of get flipped around, because with weak positioning, we have more conversations after the proposal because we've got to answer objections. We've got to clarify things because things aren't quite right. We're trying to make things fit where they don't necessarily fit. Whereas with strong positioning, it's usually like, okay, great, let's do this. What's the average price? Well, when you have a great fit, you have great value, great perceived value. You have people wanting more of what you offer. You have fewer price objections, et cetera. What's your win rate? Going to be much higher when it's the right fit. And so you can see down here, the revenue is dramatically different. And the number of conversations is actually higher with weak positioning because we're having to do more work for less revenue. And this is going to come into play in a second because everyone believes the math here. At least everyone I've talked to has said, yes, that makes sense. Strong positioning is better, but. So with all this, I'm going to share the one thing I really want you to take away from this, and it is my top secret sales process for solo consultants. So just be ready. It's really complicated. Here's the plan. Figure out exactly who you want to talk to and talk to them. right? Remember, we're in a relationship business, so we're in a conversation business. So who are we going to have conversations with? And let's actually make sure that happens. If you do this, good things will happen. If you don't do this, you're going to struggle. And I know because I've tried it both ways, usually not intentionally, but looking back, it's pretty obvious what was going on. So let's delve into a little bit more detail here. First of all, I have an arrow there. This is going to be an iterative process, right? Part of figuring out exactly who you want to talk to is by having those conversations. Things get more clear over time, and they might evolve over time. That's totally okay too. So let's figure out exactly who we want to talk to. And I don't know, some people here may be too young to remember who this is. This is Christopher Reeve as Clark Kent, not as Superman. And a lot of freelancers show up as Clark Kent. Now, you don't have to be Superman all the time. That's going to get really irritating at dinner with your family. But for your clients in your business world, you are Superman. You have superpowers that help people who really need help in certain situations. And if you are hiding that as Clark Kent, how are people going to know to call you? So we want to talk to the right people with the right words. As somebody who loves to make fun of cheesy marketing acronyms, I have coined, I believe, the cheesiest marketing acronym of all time, mega positioning, but it's just a nice way to remember things. So M stands for magnetic. We want to attract the right people and we want to repel the wrong people, or you can think of it as refer them elsewhere if repel is too negative for you. But the idea here is just like a magnet in the real world, the marketing magnet of our positioning has two poles, and those poles are of equal and opposite strength. And what we tend to want to do is attract everybody and repel nobody. And magnets just do not work that way in physics and in marketing. And we can only make it as attractive as it is repulsive. And so we want to really dial up the strength of that magnet so that our ideal clients are like, oh my gosh, finally, somebody gets it. Where have you been all my life? And just as importantly, the people who are going to waste our time, object to everything, if heaven forbid we actually land them as a client, they're going to be a nightmare. We want to let them know up front, hey, this is not the right place for you. Everybody wins. And when we get nervous, when we don't have a system in place and we think, oh gosh, this is the one referral I got this month, I better close it, right? And then you start trying to justify, even subconsciously, I've got to go work with this client or this prospect. That's where we get into trouble. And instead we know, hey, there's actually a big universe of folks out there who are those ideal clients that we really want to help. Let me refer this person to someone who's going to be a better fit so that my precious time is spent on the people that I'm really called to help. So that's the magnet part. And people are like, yeah, that makes sense. And then it's like, okay, well, what's your ideal client profile? And it's like, well, it's this and that and blah, 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 blah. And it gets all amorphous. It's like, wait a second, this isn't a strong magnet. Well, I know, but my business is special and there's so many different people that I help and I don't want to make my market too small. And I think rationally, we know that even the small market that we're trying to cut down to, it's way bigger than we're going to be able to serve in a lifetime. But there's something in our lizard brain that does not like making the market smaller. At least that's my interpretation, because I've been through this struggle myself. It's very easy for me to tell you guys to do this. But man, when I try to do it myself, that lizard brain kicks in. So I get it. And what I find works well here is instead of thinking of it as big versus small, we want to think of it as easy versus hard, right? Going back to what is that easiest sale you've ever had versus what are the hard sales? What would you rather have, right? I want easy. And that is the emotional lizard brain response that lets us really dial up the strength of that magnet. I do not want to be selling. I do not want to be marketing. I want to just be out there fulfilling my mission, making my little corner of the universe a little bit brighter. And the right people are going to come. I'm going to help them. We're going to have a great time. They're going to want to do more work. They're going to want to be referral partners. They're going to sing my praises, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we know if we've got things strong enough? That's where G comes in. Define your market so that you are the 800-pound gorilla of it. And here we are, we're a bunch of freelancers, right? None of us think of ourselves as 800-pound gorillas because we're defining what we do in terms of other people's markets. We, as business owners, get to define our market. Now, of course, really the market perception is what's really valuable, but we might as well plant the seed of what we want the market to think of us as. So that if you are in this little sub segment of whatever the broader market is, you are the person who is the natural choice. When Una's flipping through her mental Rolodex, she's going to go, aha, obviously you. When somebody else is flipping through their mental Rolodex, aha, obviously you, right? You were like the no one gets fired for buying IBM of that market. Lastly, has to be authentic, right? Going back to the Steve Jobs and the Mick Jagger and all that, it's natural to say, gosh, all this would be easy if only I was Steve Jobs. So let me try to be like Steve Jobs. And that doesn't work if you're not Steve Jobs. So we have to be true to ourselves. And this isn't just some, new age woo-woo stuff. It's really important psychologically because when we are trying to be somebody else or we are not willing to show up as ourselves, the other person can sense that something's off. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're a scam artist or you're a swindler or whatever, but someone's radar is going ding, 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 something is weird here, right? We are programmed as social mammals to look out for somebody who is not showing up authentically. So even if you're just being nervous, someone's going to detect that. They're going to say, gosh, this person's hiding something. So show up as yourself. And the other thing that's really important that I learned trying to impersonate all those other characters is it's exhausting trying to be somebody else. It is so much more fun and easier to just be yourself, or hopefully the professional best version of yourself and so on. But you have to show up as you. And your online presence should reflect that as much as possible, right? If you show up in a suit all the time, the picture of you on LinkedIn, on your website, et cetera, should be in a suit. If you never show up in a suit, why is there some picture of you in a suit, right? That's going to cause that radar to ding when you show up in a sweatshirt. So here's a quick view of this is literally a screen in my anti-CRM. It's the mission and positioning page where it's like, okay, play Mad Libs. All of these are clickable fields and you go enter. Like I help ideal clients. I want to drill down into at least 3 attributes that make them ideal. What's the big pain? What's the cost of that pain? What have they tried or what would they likely try if they don't call you, i.e. the traditional approach, and why doesn't that work? So this is usually a way for a freelancer to pick a fight with conventional wisdom. Like, sure, you just hired this big firm or you went with the blah, 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 blah. That works great for XYZ, but because of these attributes over here, you're going to suffer from this drawback. My unique approach actually lets you enjoy the benefit. And then instead of saying I'm a web designer or I'm a business coach, what is your actual superhero name? Right? I am the someone. I am the Superman. And then what's your origin story? I think everyone on this call probably has a really interesting story about why you are where you are today. And this goes back to that authenticity part of the mega positioning. Like it gives another human being a lot of surface area to grab onto and say, oh, okay, I get it. Right? Like if I just said, here's my pitch deck about why you need a CRM, like that's fine, but it doesn't tell you anything when it's like, gosh, Reuben effed up sales for decades. And you're like, okay, well, that's interesting. Like that's something I can relate to. So make sure that you're sharing your origin story when appropriate, but certainly on your website, on your LinkedIn, and when appropriate in personal conversations.
Reuben,
So
can I jump in there? Just
please.
ask a question just before you leave that particular point. I think I'm not generalizing here about Irish people, but I think some of us are certainly awkward about relating to superheroes or classifying ourselves as superheroes. So is there a way to address that in some shape or form? I mean, I think one thing we are generally good at is storytelling. So I think what you're emphasizing here is the importance of having a story about how you have arrived at the place that you're in and the expertise that you offer. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And people have a lot of trouble, I think, mostly the people who don't have any trouble bragging about themselves are often the psychopaths that you really don't want to hang out with or hire. And the people who feel a little reticent about it, they're often the ones that you do. So in fact, in the system, when you go to superhero name, there's a little button that says suggest, and it will give you some prompts based on some of the other things that you enter just to try to like tease out some ideas for you. But I think part of what you want to do is think of it as not like I am so great, but I help my clients overcome some problem, right? I am like the dragon slayer for whatever the dragon is for my
Gotcha.
clients.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
No, great question. So when we've got good positioning and regular conversations, that's the secret to getting referrals. It's not the only thing that helps with referrals, but if you are in a relationship business, i.e. a conversation business, we want to have that strong positioning, right? So we occupy that space in our referral partner's mind, and we want to have regular conversations with them so they know what we're up to. They know, like, and trust us, and we're sort of empowering them to notice the right time. Oh, this is somebody who needs to talk to Robert, and I can rebroadcast Robert's message to this client in a way that makes sense to Robert and is compelling. Right. When the other thing we want to do is not just what we say about what we do, we want it to be simple and clear and specific enough that those other partners can repeat it. So, same thing with our website. We want to have good positioning, we want to have a helpful website, and we want to have follow-up conversations. A lot of people say, well, I got my website up, it just proves I exist, or I have my website up and I have a lead magnet and I put people on my email list, but nobody calls me. People are not going to call you for the most part. Some people might, but for the most part, you want to be able to have follow-up conversations with them. And it's not a sales call. It's a conversation about the subject of the lead magnet, which you're an expert in and you love talking about, you love helping people with. And they, by definition of having requested it, are likely struggling with and likely eager to talk to an expert about. Right? It's like if I could uh, pull a white paper off a doctor's website and have the doctor call me, that would be wonderful. But we've got to have the conversation. So going back to the positioning, the weak positioning is kryptonite, right? This is what kills consulting because it just you're as I'm blanking on his name. One of my podcast guests said to me, most consultants never get commodified by the market. They don't give the market the chance because they commodify themselves first, right? We don't want to do that. We want to show up as Superman as best we can. So I like to think of this as the bar test. And there's this temptation sometimes, especially when we're not feeling really secure about what our messaging is, to use this flowery, jargony language to describe what we do. And if you think about you're at the bar, somebody comes over and introduces your ideal prospect to you. Oh, you got to meet so-and-so. And they say, well, what do you do? And you start speaking in jargon and they go, huh, what does that mean? Right? That's not what we want to do. And then hopefully you've had a drink or two. And so you're ready to say, well, what it really means is blah, 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 blah. And then you can go back and say, well, gosh, why did I waste all that time with all the nonsense that somebody asked me to explain? Why don't I just go to the language that actually works? And, it sounds really embarrassingly stupid, right? But I did this for years, right? Like, oh, why doesn't your website just say that? Oh, that makes sense. Why didn't you put that in your proposal, right? Why does it have all that BS in it? I don't know. So strip it down to real human language. And I don't know, sorry. So secret to winning clients is that good positioning and then follow-up conversations, right? Let's talk about actually the second part of the two-step sales process, talking to clients. So I like to think of this as flawless follow-up. And before we get into that, what happens if we have less than flawless follow-up? We have flawed follow-up, if you will, right? So here's a chart. Again, sorry, I'm a nerd. I like numbers. I like math because it doesn't lie. But what's our follow-up percentage, right? I just have a matrix here from 100% down to 10%. And obviously, if we follow up flawlessly, it doesn't matter how many conversations are required. Eventually, we get there. But most of us don't have infinite time. And most of us are not hitting 100%. So even if we go to 90%, right, if we need 3 conversations at 90% follow-up, we've lost a quarter of our business just from lack of follow-up. At 80%, we've lost half of it. Right? If we need 5, we've lost 2/3 of it. And so there's nothing to me more frustrating as an engineer than wasted effort. Right? It's one thing if you screw something up or you didn't do something, but like doing like half the work or 3/4 of the work and then having it be wasted because you didn't follow up. And I've done this. It's like, oh gosh, it's so infuriating. And I just invested all that money or time or energy, some combination of to get those leads in the door, have the initial conversation, have the follow-up, and then I forgot to enter that thing in the CRM and blah, 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 they went away. And of course, if we don't win all of our deals, this compounds even further, right? So really important that we follow up. And we don't want to waste the time, the money, the energy, etc. So hopefully people are bought into that concept of follow-up is really useful. And here's what I've learned after years of struggling with this, right? We have to want to talk to people. If you are forcing yourself to do it, it is much less likely to happen. So make it fun. And a lot of this goes back to that notion of, are we trying to sell somebody who we really shouldn't be trying to sell? Or are we trying to help somebody who's in our world? We're mutually working on a problem that we really care about. Right? Like I like to think about the contrast between a doctor and a used car salesperson. Used car salesperson's job is to sell that car. Doesn't matter if it's the right car for you or not. The doctor, hopefully, at least stereotypically, right, is not trying to put you under the knife. They're trying to diagnose and prescribe the appropriate thing for you. Who's having more fun at their job, right? I think generally the doctor. We need to know when we're going to talk to somebody. So each contact needs to have a next conversation date. And it should, by default, have a system to have us keep talking to somebody at a reasonable interval. We should have control over it. But one of the things that frustrated me with Salesforce and most of the traditional tools, they have a field for this, but the default is I never talk to this person again unless I manually enter something in here. And that leads to that number going to 90 to 80 to 70% or whatever, because you end up with too many tabs open, whatever, and you forgot to put that date in, and next thing you know, you've run into somebody a year later and go, oh, whatever happened to that? Oh, shoot. And then block off time in your calendar to actually do this. It sounds really dumb, but it's like, I can't tell you how many times I've said this and how many times I've heard this from other people. Like, my number one priority this week is business development. I've got to follow up with my prospects. Oh, how'd it go last week? Well, I got busy. And I mean, there are weeks when life happens, client emergencies, whatever. But by default, we want to start with, here's when I'm actually going to do this. There's like all the people, I don't know whether this happens in Ireland and America, everyone gets a gym membership in January and pretends they're going to work out this year and be really healthy. And most people don't bother to put the time in the calendar to go to the gym. So when are you going to actually go, right? And same thing with having these conversations. Put time in your calendar on a recurring basis by default to make it happen. Sometimes life will interfere. Sometimes you'll have more time, and you can always expand those time slots to talk to more people. But by default, it's just going to happen so much more regularly if you block out that time in advance. Next, have a really easy way to flip through the people you need to talk to. Because what I found was I would stare at a list of like, oh my gosh, like I'm just logged into my CRM. I have 1,000 people I need to talk to. Who should I talk to first? And it's a really dumb thing because it doesn't matter in a sense. I mean, it does matter, but talking to anybody would be better than talking to nobody because you're stressed about who you should talk to next, right? And instead, what I would do is I would stress about who I was going to talk to next and not talk to anybody. And then like at the end of the day, be like, oh my gosh, I haven't talked to anybody. I should just call somebody, right? If I just started that way, it would have been better. But have a way that you can just say, okay, this person, then this person, then this person, and not have to think about who's next. Make sure that you take good notes and be able to see and search them. So you can pick up where you left off with an individual contact. You can make connections. Oh, who's that person who does websites for dentists or whatever? Let me search for dentists. Things like that you can pull up and make your conversations more useful, and also sort of show yourself the value of taking good notes. A lot of times people don't take good notes because they're like, well, you know, after I'm done with it, I don't really reference it again. It's just in my notebook and I never search it. But if you actually are making use of it, it sort of encourages you to put those details in. And then something that I actually find valuable, I like to think I'm this like, right-brained engineering type, but having some peer accountability. We're all solos and we don't have a VP of sales breathing down our neck, thank goodness. But it's nice to have some peer accountability to say, oh, I'm going to log into my Mimiran dashboard after this call, and I know that I am not in first place on my leaderboard, if you will, that some of my other customers that I'm connected with are having more conversations than me this week. And one, that makes me proud. And two, it sort of encourages me, even though like I shouldn't need that encouragement. It's completely irrational, but it's just nice because we're social creatures and we want to go work out with other people.
Reuben, can I again interrupt and ask a question just on that thing of contacting or recontacting clients, whether they're existing clients or new clients, but just how do you avoid that trap of becoming a real irritant to a client where you've gone, okay, they know me, they know what I'm selling, I'm going to check in with them in 2 weeks' time, and then I'm going to check in again at the end of the month. Again, I think there's a kind of a reluctance, I think, on the part of a lot of freelancers, including ourselves, to kind of fall into that trap of being a pain in the ass, frankly.
Absolutely. And I think the short answer is it takes practice. But the most essential thing is there's a difference between I'm checking in because that's what salespeople do, and I'm calling up to talk to a peer and have a conversation that I am not pitching anything on.
Okay.
And at the right time, someone is going to raise their hand and say, "Hey, Peter, can you help us with this?" Or Peter, you need to talk to my buddy so and so.
Hmm.
That's I think the biggest mindset difference. Like
Okay.
we can tell, and the other person can tell which kind of conversation we're having. And the irony is, the better job we do at just sort of connecting human to human,
Hmm.
the less less we're going to feel like we have to pitch because we're actually going to get more business. And instead, if you're in the vicious cycle of, oh gosh, I don't really have a lot of business, I really need to drum some up, I'm going to go pound my
Hmm.
past clients, that's going to be counterproductive.
Sure. Yeah.
So think of it as I want to relate to people human to human. And to some extent, you may not know what the right frequency is for every person. And you got to call and find out. And you're going to realize, gosh, these guys, I don't need to be calling every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I need to call them twice a year.
Hmm.
These
I
other
think
guys,
yeah, you've made the point before as well on previous podcasts and also at that session in Freelance Business Month that people hate being sold to, but they don't mind buying things, whether it's services or products or whatever. So it's finding the right moment when they might be in the market for, web design or copy or, fractional marketing advice or whatever it might be. So you only learn that presumably over time by kind of keeping in touch with those individuals, but not that kind of hardcore sales approach.
We had
exactly.
just to jump in on that, we were at an event last week where there was a networking expert giving a presentation, and he was saying that a way to avoid becoming kind of that pain in the ass type of person and still remaining top of mind was to sort of flip it a little bit and to say, here's something that I thought might be of use to you. And rather than asking for anything, what you're actually doing is offering something up to sort of spark that conversation and ignite it again.
Yeah, I think again, there's a difference between I am trying to wheedle some business out of you conversation and the I am catching up with someone that I enjoy talking to conversation. And one thing that I didn't appreciate when I was younger is that the really successful sales reps, right, the ones who were driving the fancy cars and all that, they were not wheedling anyone for business. They were just great at maintaining those relationships. And as someone who didn't like sales, who's introverted, all that stuff that a lot of people here can probably relate to, I didn't know how to do that. And I realized, part thanks to COVID, it's like most introverts actually really like having conversations on their terms. And one of the great things about having your own business is you can have these conversations on your terms, right? You can talk about stuff that you find really interesting with other people who find it interesting and have a really good time. And I went from dreading having these calls because I was doing the drum up business calling
Mm.
to and I would have the tension in my neck and all that. If I could actually force myself to do it too. I spend all day on Zoom pretty much, and I have a blast.
Yeah.
Just a question in, which I think is relevant for what you're talking about just right now. Do you think that emails or LinkedIn messages are, an effective way of communication, or are phone calls better?
Great question. And as somebody who has screwed this up as well, emails, LinkedIn, social, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all of that stuff, we should think of it as facilitating, but not replacing conversations. If you're in an e-commerce business, that's fine, right? You don't need to have a conversation. You email people and they click add to cart. If you're in a relationship business, you're in a conversation business, we want to use those other technologies as a way to remind people what we're up to. As you were saying, you can't have conversations with everybody all the time. But if you just get a bunch of random emails from people, that doesn't mean anything. But if you get an email from someone you just had a conversation with last week, oh, by the way, here's the update on that project that you were looking for, right? It builds the relationship. Or broadcast to your list, hey, we're doing this event, come show up. Let's have some conversations. It's about facilitating rather than substitution. And I think I've fallen into this trap myself. It is so tempting to think, this is a shiny object that gets me out of having to talk to people. And that's exactly the wrong approach.
Thanks, Reuben.
All right. So just a reminder, positioning, right? This is the foundation. We want to have flawless follow-ups with partners and prospects, have a lead magnet or multiple lead magnets on your website. Make sure your LinkedIn, whatever other social media presence you have that positioning working for you there as well. Right? I see a lot of people who have a LinkedIn tagline that's like consultant, business coach, or web freelancer or something like that. It's like, that's fine, but it's not actually doing anything for you. Let's take some of that powerful positioning and stick it right there on your LinkedIn tagline. And then just a reminder, because this plan is super complicated and I don't want anyone to forget all the steps. We want to figure out exactly who we want to talk to, and we want to talk to them. Some questions people tend to ask, like, how many people do you need to talk to? Who are they? When will you have them? Or what are you picking a fight against? This is going to vary. And I think the right answer is start with whoever you're already talking to. For some people, that might be hundreds of people. For some, it might be a dozen. But once you start with the easy conversations, I like to think of it as for a skiing analogy. If anyone skis, like don't try to jump off the Black Diamond slope. If this seems hard and challenging, go to the bunny slope. Call the people you're going to have a great conversation with. Work your way up, and before you know it, you realize that you're never going to have to go on the Black Diamond slopes, because you're going to have enough stuff coming from the easier conversations that you're not going to have to go hard sell anybody in the sort of the I'm going to go figure out how to get into Coca-Cola and sell their VP of marketing kind of thing. Who are they? That's a process we're figuring out via our positioning. When will you have these conversations? Make sure there's time in your calendar. Have a calendaring tool as well so that people can schedule time on your calendar. I like to schedule things in advance when possible, but I don't want to wait on that. If you wait on that all the time, you never can cover enough ground. And what I find is, even if I'm just leaving a voicemail for somebody, that's a lot different than just sending an email. Them hearing your voice, then it's like there's another human. There's a little bit more effort involved in that than just sending an email, and then you're more likely to get a call back and restart that conversation. And then something else that I think people are nervous about is picking a fight. And I don't mean physically having a brawl, but picking a fight with some part of conventional wisdom, which might work well in a lot of places, but not in your particular part of the universe. So for me, for example, I'm like, CRM suck. And probably everyone on this call is going to agree with me. And I'm not necessarily trying to pick a fight with Salesforce. Salesforce is terrible for me, right? It's great for a lot of other people, But in my world, it's terrible because it's built for the VP of sales to keep track of the sales team, and I don't have a sales team, and blah, 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 right? And so when I say that, the right people are like, oh, okay, great, I get it. And of course, the irony is when Salesforce was starting, they were brilliant at picking a fight against the incumbent at the time, which was Siebel. All they did was talk about how crappy Siebel was. And so you don't necessarily have to pick a fight directly against a competitor, but you can pick a fight against an idea, against something that's holding back your industry, it's holding back your ideal clients, whatever it might be, and show them that you're fighting for them. And this is going to energize a lot of your messaging, your marketing. And I think even when you get up in the morning and go to work, if you feel like, gosh, I'm really actually doing something different, I'm not just moving pixels around, that tends to be a little bit more exciting. So next steps. Get a list of your favorite clients. Talk to them to get help with your positioning. Oftentimes they're going to use words and you're like, oh yeah, that's what I do. Right? They're, as the former CEO of Porsche said, if you listen closely enough, your customers will tell you what business you're in. I love ChatGPT as not as a content creator, but as like an intern, a sounding board. Like take this phrase and give me a bunch of variations on it. And probably all of them are going to suck, but there might be some that are interesting and spur more thoughts in your head. Repeat as necessary until it seems easy, right? And this is why they call it a freelancing or consulting practice. Offer a lead magnet on your site. Somebody asked if there's some ideas for consulting lead magnets. I actually have a lead magnet on my site, which is a list of consulting lead magnet ideas, which you can go grab on Mimiran.com. But the thing you want to start with is your ideal client, the big problem that you help them solve. Act like you're trying to help them solve it before they even talk to you. And some people say, well, I don't want to give away my secret sauce. And my view is if they can take your lead magnet and not call you and just go do it, they're probably not an ideal client. But if they take it and they say, gosh, I'm doing steps 1 and 2 and 3 looks pretty easy. This is great. Oh man, 4 and 5, I think I need some help, but this person really knows what he's talking about. Who are they predisposed to want to have a conversation with? And then follow up with those leads by calling them and having a conversation, right? That's where the real magic actually happens. And then block off time in your calendar every week to talk to your clients and your prospects and your partners, right? This is not rocket science. It does not require advanced sales skills. It just requires being human and being willing to talk to people, but people that hopefully want to talk to you about stuff that you both want to talk about. And lastly, take good notes, make sure that they're detailed. What are the next steps? And I like to use these little flags like, let me flag when somebody says, what's really driving me crazy is I do capital P : in other words, problem, so that I can very quickly say, what are all the problems this person complained about, or solution, or decision? And you can have your own flags for whatever makes sense to you. But I find this shorthand really helpful to kind of encapsulate, because I don't want to make people go through like a clipboard, because that's not how people think. Like they're going to start with a problem and then they're going to spin around and they're going to come back and talk about the problem in a slightly different language later in the conversation and so on. And this way I can like really quickly say, okay, here's how they described all the problems across all the conversations. Even what am I really looking at here? What do they really want to see in the solution, et cetera? And then make sure, of course, that you have a next conversation date. We've got a few minutes here. I've got some questions in the chat. I'm going to try to get to all of those. Thank you. And if people want to join me, first of all, you can always go sign up for Mimiran. Anyone can go join and start a free trial, but I'm actually going to be doing a group challenge the week of January 29th. We're going to go through a lot of the stuff we talked about as a group. We're going to nail your positioning, create the flawless follow-up habit, create a lead magnet. You can find out more at mimiran.com/challenge, or of course, email me at Reuben@mimiran.com. So I have been talking and talking. Let me make sure that we have time for questions.
Reuben, that was great. Yeah, as you say, a lot of common sense stuff, but as we hear, it's not all that common that you hear it. So it's great to have some of those things reinforced. Can I kick off by asking a question in relation to cold calling and outsourcing your cold calling to so-called experts in terms of cold calling? So there's lots of companies some of them in Ireland, some of them internationally, who offer that service. And we probably all get them on LinkedIn saying, I can double your sales conversion if you outsource your sales to me. What's your view on outsourcing your cold calling as a consultant or a freelancer?
Um, I I believe it is theoretically possible for it to work. I have not, I've heard a lot of cases of it not working, and I can't pull an instance of it working out of my head. And what usually happens is the people who do it are that slide I had with the cycle of doom. They go, oh, shiny object. I can hire somebody else to do my cold calling. But they don't have the other stuff, especially the positioning down. That tends to be the big problem. Um, and and so then you end up with usually a bunch of wasted energy. And I'm not saying it's always going to be that way, um, but I would think about it as if you have your positioning down, might that be a way to augment your capabilities? Sure, but don't do it to escape doing the hard work of building that foundation.
Very good. Okay, great. Look, I think a lot of the things that you covered there are really, really key. I think that again, the obvious one that sometimes it's probably less obvious to all of us is that positioning piece. I mean, we're great in the marketing business of advising people on their positioning, but getting our own positioning right can sometimes be a chore or something that we forget about. So I think that's really, really key. As you say, it acts like a magnet. It starts attracting your tribe to you. So the type of clients that you want to attract and the people who probably work with you in the first place. And it's pushing the people who are not going to be a good fit away from you as well. So I think that's really key.
I think just to add to that, Peter, I think it's actually a really good idea to talk to your clients and people who know you really well, collaborators or partners, and to ask them how they would describe you, how, you know, what they see as your kind of key skills and what they understand you to do really, really well. Because sometimes you lack that perspective yourself. And sometimes you actually think if you do that, you're kind of sounding maybe a bit arrogant or haughty. But like when you ask a third party for that feedback, it's really, really good to help you kind of really isolate the things that you're really known for. And that is your kind of personal brand. I guess it's what other people are saying about you when you're not in the room. So I think that's a thing that everybody should be doing all of the time.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was flipping back to this slide here because I had somebody who went through this challenge last year, and he helps giant companies with implementing this very specific kind of very complicated software. It's very nitty gritty, detail oriented, frustrating stuff. And one of the things that came out of these interviews was that he always dealt with things with an even keel and had a good sense of humor. And that was something that was really important in these projects because everyone would kind of reach the end of their rope. And he had no idea that a sense of humor was a brand asset for him.
Yeah.
I think that's
the authenticity, isn't it?
Yeah. I think that's again a really important point that you made about that follow-up conversation, that it's not necessarily a sales call. You know, it's sales in there somewhere, but you know, it's having that ability to be yourself and make a bit of fun, have a bit of crack, which we're generally reasonably good at in the Irish market. Less jargon, I think, again, really, really key, because we all drift into the acronyms and so on, because there are so many of them around the industry that we're involved in.
And I think Una was asking, like, what do you do if somebody's like, don't call us anymore? I'm like, well, don't call them, right? Like, everyone should save a bunch of time and move on. And that's the advantage of feeling confident. Like, I like to think of it as like you're a doctor, you've got a waiting room full of patients. This one is not the right fit, right? Even if they have the condition that you treat, sometimes you just have a personality clash or whatever, send them down the hall to a different doctor and move right along. Don't waste any energy on it. And sometimes you're going to decide, I don't want to talk to this person anymore. I just don't like them. That's okay. Right. That's when you say next conversation date, never. Tag them as disqualified and keep moving.
Very
Reuben,
good.
you set up Mimiran a couple of years ago, and by all accounts, it's going really well. And I know you position yourself and position the company as the anti-CRM. So you've kind of touched on Salesforce. I think a lot of consultants, particularly that we've dealt with or deal with, use things like HubSpot and so on. And I know you don't want to use it as have a go at competition, but you've designed this obviously with individual solopreneurs in mind. People are working freelance, people are working contract. And just how did you come about developing your own system? You just found the other ones weren't working, was it for you?
I'd love to say that I'm a visionary like Steve Jobs and I saw the marketplace and blah, 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 blah. And that's not what happened. I started building things to plug into a CRM to do the things that they weren't doing that I needed to have done.
Right.
And then I started telling some people about it and they started asking for them. And then people started asking for more stuff. And I never intended to build more, but then I realized that for our tribe, a lot of there's tons of tools out there, but they don't do the right stuff for our tribe. And then people started saying, hey, I love Mimiran. I hate my CRM. Will you just make Mimiran do the CRM stuff? And of course I said, no, that would be nuts. The world doesn't need another CRM. And you can see how good I am at predicting the future. But looking back in hindsight, and I've used HubSpot as well, but all those other tools are built for a VP of sales or a sales director or something like that to keep track of a sales team. That is what a CRM is for. It is not for an individual to create and nurture relationships in his or her spare time, especially when they don't like sales and marketing.
Yes.
But that's what we all need.
Yeah.
And so over time, I was like, oh, maybe I should listen to my customers. Like I'm always telling them to do, right? Maybe I should take my own advice and make my life easier in the process. And the thing that I really liked about it, a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about in terms of having these conversations and having fun and doing all that, like I am not just out there selling this, I am user number one. And like if I can make this work for me, I can make it work for just about anybody because I have screwed up everything in the book when it comes to actually following the process that I just laid out in the slides.
So you didn't set out with a grand plan to take over the CRM world. Yeah. Same way.
No.
Didn't set out with a grand plan to take over the freelance world either. Yeah. And
no.
Years on it's evolved into something that hopefully benefits a lot of people. Yeah. Look, you're very good. I'm conscious of time. I'm conscious of your time. I'm conscious of people's time. Are there any other questions that the community might have to put to Reuben before we do a wrap up?
There's one question in on it's actually on really any advice on how to actually find that ideal client.
And May, are we talking about finding the who that profile is or finding people who fit the profile or both?
I'd say it's probably both.
I mean, I think figuring out the profile, that's kind of some of the stuff we talked about earlier, like go talk to your favorite clients. Who are they? And sometimes you're like, gosh, all the people I've worked with have been kind of a pain. I need to level up my clients. That's fine too. But here are the things that I like about the projects that I worked on, for example. In fact, the latest Salespreneurs episode I did with actually an Irish guy, Alistair McDermott. He talks about his framework for kind of overlapping what you're good at and what people find valuable and what they pay for and so on. But I think it comes from having the conversations and it comes from thinking about it, not just from a marketing spreadsheet perspective, but it's almost like a little morbid, but it's like we all have very limited time here. Who do I want to spend that time with that I'm going to help, right? Versus I'm going to, there's like sort of like the I'm going to sit back on the couch and numb my brain with Netflix client.
Yeah.
Or there's the people that are like, I'm making my little part of the universe brighter client. Who are those people that call to me that way?
Yeah, I loved that that thought, like being able to, when you work for yourself, you have that, I suppose, opportunity to make your own little corner of the universe brighter. And I think it's like, how can I do that in my interactions with my client, but also what type of client is going to create the conditions for that to happen? And that's quite a personal sort of bit of exploration, I guess, that needs to happen. I don't think it's a one size fits all, right?
Absolutely. And it kind of, in some ways, it goes back to that origin story. And for me, I shared a little bit of my origin story at the beginning, but it's like it's very motivating for me because I have a visceral emotional experience with the problem I'm trying to solve, and I struggled with it for years. So it's like I'm trying to help the past version of myself. That's not the only way to find your ideal client, but that's one way to do it, right? And that gives me a motivation that, frankly, it's less monetarily satisfying than helping giant Fortune 500 companies improve sales and marketing by 0.75%.
Yeah.
But it's a hell of a lot more emotionally fulfilling.
Yeah. Reuben, again, I'm really conscious of your time and the hour of the morning that it is over there in Texas. So look, on behalf of myself and Una and all of the people who are here today, I know some of them have had to bow out. But again, a big Irish thank you for your time, for getting up so early and for sharing some great advice. We really, really appreciate it.
And there's
Thanks so much for having me, folks.
all of Rose pointed out that there's a whole load of resources on Reuben's website that are available to everyone. So I would say check it out. I also listened to that interview that you did with Alistair McDermott on your podcast, and it was excellent. I'm only sorry that it's way too early in the morning for you to take out the Japanese whiskey. That seems like a sort of recurring theme of your podcast. But yeah, next time we get you back, we'll do it in the evening so that it won't be.
There we go.
It won't be too unseemly for you to have a whiskey in your hand.
That sounds great.
Feel free, guys, to check out Reuben's website. He's made a kind offer there. If anybody is thinking of creating or professionalizing their own contact system and so on, we'd highly recommend the one that he has. So, and he's kindly offered a discount, which we didn't expect, to be honest, today. So thank you for that, Reuben, again. Connect in with him on LinkedIn. I'm sure you're on other platforms as well. And do have a listen to that Sales for Nerd podcast. It's great. Really, really good. So Reuben, again, and thanks to everybody for showing up today. We're going to have another session in 2 weeks' time on the 7th of February. We have the topic is how to raise your rate today to win business tomorrow. And again, we have a brilliant expert, a business coach from the States again, Melissa Lieberman. And we've seen Melissa.
She's awesome.
Again. Yeah, we've seen Melissa at Freelance Business Month back in October, and she's kindly agreed to do a session for the Indie List on the 7th of Feb. So again, we let everybody know about that. And again, thanks to our friends from Contracting Plus for helping to put this all together as well. So look, guys, have a great month. Reuben, you might stay on for a minute or two, and we'll let
everybody else. I'm happy to hang out.
Yeah, great. And guys, thank you, and have a great month. We'll talk to you soon. Yeah.